Hi, let's talk about animal nutrition, and we'll talk some about human nutrition and mammals mostly, but we'll also talk about a few other kinds of animals. So animals we can basically divide them into three different kinds of feeding styles. Animals are all heterotrophs, we already know that, but generally we can divide animals into herbivores, which eat mainly plants, or we would also include algae eaters as herbivores, carnivores, which mainly eat other animals, and then omnivores, which would be animals that regularly consume both plants and other animals. And although we are grouping them this way, as you know, we have found out, because nothing is simple in biology, that animals that we call carnivores will sometimes eat plants, and animals that we call herbivores will occasionally eat on a dead carcass or eat bird eggs or something. So keep in mind that even for the strict herbivores and strict carnivores, it's not that strict. So an animal's diet has to provide three basic things. One would be energy. So we need ATP and GTP for cellular processes, and the diet has to provide an adequate amount of energy because animals are not photosynthetic, so we can't get energy from the sun. We have to get it from our food. We also need the building blocks for making all of the organic molecules that we can synthesize. So that means we have to have a source of nitrogen for making proteins and the amino acids that we need. We have to have the carbon skeletons and backbones and building blocks to make fatty acids and the amino acids that we need and carbohydrates. And then there are also things that are essential nutrients, things that we cannot make that must be in the diet, or there will be diseases of deficiency. So these things that are essential nutrients, there are a few different categories here of things that we call essential. So essential, again, essential doesn't have the same meaning that it does in everyday speech. Essential means something that the animal cannot make from simpler parts. It has to be consumed as is as part of the diet. So, and animals have far more essential nutrients than plants. If you remember from plants, plants don't have any organic essential nutrients. They can get all of their organic molecules simply from carbon dioxide and energy from the sun, and they can make them. And then they have some minerals that are essential. But plants don't have any essential organic molecules, just available nitrogen, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and some minerals and metals. Animals have a lot more essential nutrients. So there are essential amino acids, so we'll talk about those. Essential fatty acids, meaning that we can use a lot of different fatty acids as sources of energy, but there's a few that we need specifically to make different components of our cells, and they have to be in the diet. Vitamins, which you've heard of, and minerals, and we'll talk about the difference between those two. For essential amino acids, there are 20 amino acids that eukaryotes, and that would include plants too, there are 20 amino acids that are used to make protein. There's a couple of additional amino acids that some bacteria use, but there's 20 amino acids for eukaryotes. 10 of these we can synthesize either from other amino acids or from simpler components. And then there's 10 of the 20 that we must get in our diet, and these are called the essential amino acids. They have to be absorbed after digestion directly through the wall of the small intestine, as is. We need them to make proteins. Deficiencies in one of the essential amino acids will result in improper protein synthesis and lack of protein synthesis, which can be very serious. Animal products provide the most complete proteins. Plants are generally, a single plant might be low in one of the essential amino acids, at least for the human diet. So plant proteins have to be, a single source of plant protein cannot be used because there aren't any plants that are complete. The closest complete amino acid composition for the human diet would be soy. Soy has the right amino acids, but it has another problem that plant proteins have, and that they are less well absorbed than animal proteins. If you consume proteins from an animal source, they are almost completely absorbed. If you consume protein from plants, like from legumes, it could be up to 90% absorbed, but more likely it's only going to be 40 or 50% of those amino acids are going to be absorbed. And that's just because the enzymes in our digestive tract have a difficult time breaking them down into absorbable amino acids. Vegetarians can get all their essential amino acids if they eat a variety of plants and if they are eating some animal protein. So dairy products have lots of protein, eggs have lots of protein. So vegetarians generally are consuming those products as well. So they're not in any danger of amino acid deficiency. What is an omnivore exactly? There's a lot of animals that are omnivores that you might not recognize as being omnivores. So these are animals that eat a lot of plants and animals. So an animal that eats mostly other animals, we would call a carnivore. An animal that eats mostly plants, we would call it a herbivore. Although I just mentioned that even the ones that we thought were very strict carnivores or very strict herbivores are occasionally seen eating the other thing. So it's unclear if there's actually any 100% carnivores or 100% herbivores. And in general, something that we would describe as an omnivore eats plants but cannot digest the cellulose from plants. So we eat plants, but we lack the ability to digest cellulose. If you remember from biochemistry, cellulose is made out of glucose. Cellulose is a polypeptide or a polysaccharide that's 100% glucose. But it is unavailable to us. That energy in cellulose is unavailable to us, and we also don't have any intestinal bacteria that can break it down either. So we call it fiber. Bears and many birds are also omnivores and very opportunistic eaters. So the three different diets that you hear about are, vegan has become the hip new diet in the last 20 years. Vegetarian, which has been around since the late 1800s, there has been a vegetarian movement. And then omnivorous. So really, a vegetarian diet is an omnivorous diet. It's just that vegetarians generally limit their animal products to dairy products and eggs, and generally just don't eat killed animals, and that's what a vegetarian is. So it really is an omnivorous diet, because remember, the definition of omnivorous is just that you eat both plant and animal products. Vegan, if somebody says, I'm a vegan, generally what they mean by that is they eat zero animal products at all. They eat 100% of their diet is plants. That's generally what is meant by the term vegan. Hold on a second. Birds? That's enough. Shh. So if we're trying to figure out, and there has been this is a very contentious topic. And if this is already, if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, and just me bringing this up is already making you a little concerned, just hear me out. Hear me out, because I'm only going to talk about actual scientific information. So how do we know? What is a natural, healthy diet for a human being? How could we tell? Well, one of the ways that we can tell is by looking at our closest relatives and asking, what do other primates eat? What do chimpanzees and gorillas and monkeys, what do they eat? And what about the extinct hominins during human evolution? What did Neanderthals eat? What did our other, Homo erectus, Australopithecines, what did they eat? What did the other hominins eat? And we actually do know quite a bit about what they ate. And what has our species been eating? Our species has been around for about 250,000 years. What do we know about the diet of ancient humans up through, modern recorded history? that might give us a lot of information about what a healthy diet is. Another thing we can look at is look at our actual anatomy. So we can compare our anatomy to animals that we know are herbivores, which essentially would be what a vegan is trying to be, and animals that are carnivores, and ask, and also omnivores, and ask what is our gut more like, or what are their guts like? So if we compare carnivores and herbivores, so this would be true of, a carnivore would be something like a wolf or a big cat, and a herbivore would be a rabbit, a deer, or a cow. Those would be herbivores. And what do we find in their digestive system? So for carnivores tend to have large canine teeth, and they also tend to have molars that are pointy instead of flat. They tend to have a very acidic stomach with a pH of between 1.5 to 3 tends to be the carnivore stomach. So that one we have. We don't have carnivore-like teeth, but we do have a carnivore-like acidic stomach. No fermentation to break down cellulose. Well, that's us too. We don't have any fermentation to break down cellulose. We do have, like other carnivores, some bacteria in our large intestine do make some vitamins like vitamin K, even though we don't have the right species that can break down cellulose. Carnivores have a relatively short intestine tract, and we have that too. The length of our intestine is short for a primate. Carnivores generally can fast for long periods of time without any harm whatsoever, and that's true for humans as well. Humans can easily not eat for a day or two, and it's no problem at all. In fact, you probably have fasted for medical tests. If you have a colonoscopy even, you have to fast for a day, more like a day and a half, and it's not harmful to do that. Herbivores in general have some way to ferment cellulose, and we'll talk about this two different types. Either they have foregut fermentation in a compartment of their stomach, like cows do, or they have a cecum, which is large and contains fermenting bacteria, and that would be like a rabbit or a deer would have that. Not a deer, a rabbit or a horse. They generally have a very long intestine with a very slow transit time. Generally, they have flat molars that grind, and they generally grind their teeth side to side, so we don't do that, although we do have flat molars. Herbivores generally have bacteria in their gut that can break down cellulose, and then they actually eat the bacteria. They consume the fatty acids that the bacteria make using that energy. Those bacteria also make vitamin B12, which is one of our essential nutrients. Without vitamin B12, a human being will start to show symptoms in a matter of months. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So cows don't have to consume vitamin B12 in their diet because they get it from their gut bacteria. We don't have those gut bacteria. The bacteria in their gut also make proteins and especially fatty acids that can be absorbed into the animal. So the animals aren't just getting the glucose from the digested cellulose from their fermenting gut bacteria. They're also getting fatty acids and amino acids. Herbivores generally must eat almost continuously. They spend many hours of the day eating. And for example, if you compare how many hours a day chimpanzees spend eating to how many hours a day the average human spent eating, chimpanzees spend about 4 times as many hours eating. If a typical human spends maybe 2 hours or possibly even 3 if you eat a lot, actually chewing and swallowing and eating, 2 hours would be probably a lot. If you actually timed how much time you're actually putting food in your mouth every day, 2 hours is probably pretty normal. And chimpanzees would spend 8 to 10 hours a day putting food in their mouth and chewing. So considerable difference. So we're more like a carnivore. The ways that we're not like a carnivore is mostly our teeth, not But everything else on this list, that's us. So there is really not any disagreement on this among scientists. The natural human diet is an omnivorous diet, and there's a few pieces of information, additional information that might convince you of that. We need to have some plants in our diet because we lack vitamin C synthesis. So almost all mammals can make their own vitamin C. Primates can't. Guinea pigs also, and there's a few other groups of mammals that can't make vitamin C. But all the rest of the mammals, your dog and cat, they can make their own vitamin C. Mice make their own vitamin C. Primates, though, lack it. Where do you get vitamin C? Mostly from plants. There is small amounts of vitamin C in fresh meat, even if it's cooked, freshly cooked meat. But it's pretty low. And even in human populations where they eat very, very little plants, like people who live near the Arctic, they generally, for most of the year, have no plants available in their diet. Those populations traditionally really go out of their way to get plant foods like berries when they're seasonally available and preserve them. And one of the things they get from those very seasonal plant foods is vitamin C. We specifically lack B12 synthesis. The only organisms that can synthesize vitamin B12 are bacteria. So animals either have to get it in their diet or they have to have bacteria in their gut that make it. And we don't have the right bacteria to make it, so we have to get B12 in our diet. B12 does not exist in plants. There's no B12 in plants. So these two things together, the fact that we can't make vitamin C, we must get it in our diet, and the fact that we lack B12 and must get it in our diet, indicate that throughout human history, humans have been consuming foods that contain vitamin C and consuming foods that contain vitamin B12. There's just no other way around it. And although humans can go without plants for many, many months, there really aren't any human populations today of our species. There's some debate about Neanderthals. Maybe they were completely carnivorous. But human of our species, even for ones that only have plants available very seasonally, they go out of their way to eat vitamin C containing foods when those foods are available. We cannot digest cellulose, which again, that goes with being an omnivore. So other organisms that we identify as being omnivores also cannot digest cellulose. We have a tiny bit of gut fermentation, but nothing compared to animals that, really do the fermenting, which we'll talk about those. When we get our iron and protein exclusively from plants, it's very poorly absorbed. So you probably know there are some plants that do have a significant amount of iron in them, like spinach and legumes. If that's your only source of iron, you're going to be iron deficient because most of the iron is just not absorbed very well from plants. Even if there's a lot of iron present, iron from animal foods is extremely well absorbed. Protein from plants as well. Our guts are just not that fantastic at breaking it down to the amino acid level, and that's what it has to be. You really have to break down that plant protein completely to the amino acid level in order for it to be absorbed and used by your body. So you can get enough protein exclusively from plants, but it's harder. It's more difficult. Plants also lack 2 of the essential fatty acids that are needed for brain health, and this is especially important for children. Children need massive amounts of fatty acids, of these essential fatty acids, to grow their brain, to use to make phospholipids for cell membranes, and deficiencies of these essential fatty acids would be extremely serious for children. The good news is that they're extremely abundant in full-fat dairy and in eggs. So you can get them without actually eating any meat. They're also present in butter as well. If we look at other primates, all primates are omnivorous, even the ones that eat way more plants than most humans do. So if we look at chimpanzees, for example, chimpanzees love to eat meat, and they, in fact, catch and kill monkeys. That's their favorite kind of meat to eat. They don't eat them every day, and they certainly eat way more plants than we do. But monkeys as well will catch and eat small lizards. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and monkeys also eat a lot of insects, which, remember, insects are animals and they contain B12. So a monkey whose only animal consumption is some insects, they're going to have plenty of B12. A monkey who eats 100% plants is going to die of B12 deficiency. And some zoos found that out the hard way about 100 years ago, when a lot of monkeys were being brought in. Leaf-eating monkeys were thought to only eat plants. And when they were given a completely plant diet in zoos, they died. They died of protein deficiency and anemia. And it turned out it's because they actually eat a lot of insects. And the zoos were not feeding them any insects. In fact, they were washing all the produce to get all the insects off of it. So primates are all omnivores. We're a primate. Humans have had to have been omnivores until B12 first became available. So vitamin B12 first became available as an over-the-counter vitamin supplement in the 1960s. So before that, nobody could have been a vegan. Nobody. You'd be dead. There's nobody who could have been a vegan for any extended period of time. B12 deficiency, you can survive without any B12 in your diet for months, but 6 months to a year, that's when the symptoms start to show up without any supplementation. We've also found out the hard way quite recently that the vegan diet is fatal to babies and toddlers, even with supplementation. There are literally dozens of parents who have been prosecuted for harming their children, in some cases killing their children or permanently stunting their growth by putting them on a vegan diet as a baby or a toddler. So, and it's due to all of these things. It's due to lack of B12. It's due to poor iron absorption. Babies and toddlers are very poor at breaking down plant protein in their gut and absorbing the amino acids. So babies who have been on extended vegan diets is very well documented. You can find lots of scientific papers on this topic. Babies who've been and toddlers who've been put on a vegan diet show evidence of protein deficiency, permanent brain damage, and nerve damage. It's very, very sad. And, you know, so I think we can safely say that a vegan diet is not a natural or a healthy diet for a human. Humans are naturally omnivorous. So, but what if you want to be a vegan? For, you know, ethical reasons, you don't want to eat killed animals. I totally understand that. You can be very healthy on a vegetarian diet because it's basically an omnivorous diet. As long as you make sure you're including some animal fats, which would be found in full-fat dairy and the egg yolks, and B12 and iron. Probably, if you're going to be a long-term vegetarian, you want to supplement with B12 and iron, because there are some studies that have just surveyed people who are voluntary vegans and vegetarians, and they found that a significant number of vegetarians, even though they're taking vitamins, are deficient in B12 and iron. So that's something to be checked when you go to the doctor. If you want to be a vegan, short term, it's a modified fast. You could easily, with no risk, be a vegan for a week or a month. But if you're going to do it permanently, like for months and months and years, you must supplement with B12 or you will die. You will get permanent nerve damage and you will die. It will take months, but usually within 6 months to a year of stopping all ingestion of B12, that's when the symptoms start to show up. And it's sometimes by the time you have symptoms, the nerve damage is permanent. So if you're going to be a vegan, either do it short-term only or make sure that you're being monitored for your B12 and iron levels. Even if you're supplementing, however, it's been found, and there are scientific studies to back this up, that people who've been vegan for a long time show signs of protein deficiency. They have poor wound healing and osteoporosis. And there are some hospitals well, not in this country that I'm aware of, but in Australia, where some of these studies were done, that refused to do surgery on vegans because they have such poor outcomes. Because they are, and because wound healing and bone health requires enough protein. And if you've been vegan for a long time, you're going to have protein deficiency. So be very careful. If you're going to do it short term as a fast, like after the holidays, you're going to be vegan for the month of January, go for it. Fasting is a normal human thing. Humans have been fasting that we know of for thousands of years voluntarily and involuntarily for all of our history when there wasn't enough food. So a vegan diet is a modified fast. It's a fast where you're only eating plants. But again, a fast is something that you can't continue indefinitely. So keep that in mind. And again, I haven't said anything here that's controversial among scientists or can't be backed up with lots of scientific studies. So essential fatty acids, we have several of those. And remember, fatty acids are used for a lot of things, especially for making cell membranes. If you don't have the right fatty acids, you can't make phospholipids, which are essential for making all of your cells. And these are especially important in organs of the body that have a lot of membranes, like nervous tissue has an enormous amount of membrane. So essential fatty acids are unlikely to be deficient. And if you're just eating any old sloppy diet that has some fat in it, it's unlikely that you're going to be deficient in essential fatty acids. Usually these deficiencies only show up in people who are severely restricting fat and trying to eat no fat. Otherwise, if you're just eating pretty much any kind of fats at all, you're going to be getting essential fatty acids. Cholesterol, although it's super important, is not an essential nutrient because every cell in your body can make cholesterol. So here are 4 essential fatty acids: linoleic acid, alpha-linoleic acid, which these two are abundant in pretty much everything. So linoleic acid and alpha-linoleic acid are found in both plant foods and animal foods. It would be incredibly difficult to have a deficiency in one of these fatty acids. It's EPA and DHA that are the problem. So let me see if I could say these. These are really hard to say. Eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid. We'll just call them EPA and DHA. These are not found in plant foods, and we can make a little bit of them, convert them from other things, but not very well. And especially for growing children, EPA and pregnant women, EPA and DHA are really important. And even a small amount of animal foods, it will give you these. So fish, egg yolks have plenty. So if you're including some egg yolks in your diet as a vegetarian, you're going to have plenty of these essential fatty acids. Like I said, it is difficult to become deficient, but the reason that we know about these is because people have done it. Vitamins are organic molecules. So you've probably heard vitamins and minerals, vitamins and minerals. So the difference between them is vitamins are organic. So remember, again, organic means that just that it has carbon in it. So vitamins have carbon as part of their structure. They are synthesized by other organisms. They had to be made by something. They're not just found in the soil. So vitamins are organic molecules, and we need them in pretty small amounts. Most of them are enzyme cofactors or participate in the synthesis of something critical. And we have 13 of these vitamins. Most of them are water soluble, and there's a few that are fat soluble, like vitamin A. Vitamin D is included in this category because when it was first discovered, it was thought because you can get it in your diet. It was thought to be only obtained from the diet, but now we know that vitamin D is a hormone. It's a cholesterol-based hormone, and it probably shouldn't be considered a vitamin, but just for historical reasons, we still consider it a fat-soluble vitamin. Choline is a newly recognized one. Choline is an essential organic molecule. This one is a more recently discovered one, so it's not included in the 13. And again, we have discovered this because you only can see a deficiency in choline in people who consume no animal foods, because choline is fairly abundant in animal foods like cheese and egg yolk. So deficiency, though, especially in children, is extremely serious. Choline is very important for the brain. So I in no way want you to memorize this list, but let's just look at a few things on this list. So look at all these B vitamins. There's a lot of them, and the B vitamins are all hydrophilic. They're all water soluble. And if you eat a varied diet, you won't have any trouble getting any of the B vitamins. They're found in plants and animal sources. All the B vitamins are found in plant and animal sources except for B12. B12 is only found in animal products. It is not found in plants. And if you don't have B12 in your diet, it takes a few months to become deficient, but eventually you'll start to get tingling and numbness in your fingers. You'll have trouble walking. Brain fog is another symptom. In the elderly who have B12 deficiency, because of absorption problems, they often appear to have dementia. So B12 is very, very important. And because it's a water-soluble vitamin, that means that we don't stockpile a big store of it. So it will start to run out as you eliminate it from your diet. Some of these that are historical described diseases are kind of interesting, like deficiency of vitamin B1. We actually have a name for the disease of deficiency, beriberi, because it was known about historically. Deficiency of vitamin C we call scurvy, because it was known about historically. So vitamin C is needed to synthesize collagen. So the symptoms of scurvy are because the body is not synthesizing collagen. And collagen is part of the extracellular matrix. It's important for holding all of your tissues together. So one of the early symptoms of scurvy is bleeding gums. And it's a symptom that blood vessels and tissues in your entire body are starting to lose their integrity. So wound healing, sores on the skin, because the skin is starting to come apart because of lack of collagen synthesis. And then there's a lot of other symptoms that are less visible, like osteoporosis. So that's vitamin C. Now, vitamin D is, although you can consume it in your diet, there's vitamin D in a lot of foods, and again, only animal foods like egg yolks, some dairy products. Liver has a huge amount of vitamin D, like beef liver. Lack of vitamin D is a vitamin D deficiency. First was discovered because children who have vitamin D deficiency get rickets. Their bones don't form correctly and are soft, and so they have bowed legs. That's rickets. In adults, you can also get kind of osteoporosis symptoms from vitamin D deficiency. Another interesting link recently with vitamin D is low vitamin D is a comorbidity for severe COVID. So it's already become part of the standard protocol for treating COVID patients that they give them vitamin D in the hospital. And it's been very well documented as well that people who are low vitamin D are more likely to end up in the hospital if they get COVID, more likely to end up on a ventilator if they get COVID, and more likely to end up dead if they get COVID. So one of the easiest and cheapest things that you can do to help yourself to be healthier if you should get COVID is to take vitamin D3. It's cheap. It's readily available. You can't really overdo it. Dr. Fauci himself says that he takes 6,000 international units of vitamin D3 every day, and he has been since March. So it's good enough for Dr. Fauci. I've been doing it as well for many months. I take vitamin D3. I take about 6,000 international units a day. You can get enough vitamin D from the sun, but you really have to be out in the sun a lot. And in the winter in northern Illinois, the sun simply isn't strong enough. The darker your skin, the less likely you're getting enough vitamin D from the sun, and the more likely that you need to supplement. A recent survey found that about 70 to 80% of American adults who live in the northern half of the United States are vitamin D deficient. So that's one that we probably most of us have, unless if you're not taking vitamin D3, unless you have an outdoor job where you're outside all summer, you're probably deficient. Unless you eat a lot of liver, cold water fish also has vitamin D. It's possible to get enough from the diet, but most people don't eat enough of the right foods to do that. Vitamin E and K are also in the fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin A is another interesting one because although its precursor, beta-carotene, is found in a lot of plants, our bodies have to convert that into vitamin A. There's some new studies showing that if all of your vitamin A is in the form of beta-carotene, you may be deficient because our bodies, there's a limit to how much we can convert. And getting some vitamin A in your diet directly from animal products like egg yolks is beneficial. That's kind of preliminary. That's less solid than the vitamin D COVID link. Minerals, so these are things we need that are inorganic, meaning they're not bounded to carbon. You've probably heard of most of these. Some of them we need in larger amounts, so those would be the things in pink here, like sodium and potassium, calcium and magnesium, and sulfur, which is part of protein, phosphate, and phosphorus and phosphate. Those we need in larger amounts because they're part of proteins or nucleic acids, which is the case for phosphorus and phospholipids, phosphoruses and phospholipids. The ones that are in purple here, these are the things that you would normally see on a vitamin bottle. We need them in very tiny amounts, and they're mostly enzyme cofactors, meaning that a particular enzyme is using one of these metals to transfer electrons or to stretch bonds and cause reactions to happen. So mostly that's what the rest of them are. So those are things we need in very tiny amounts. And here's a few of them. This isn't all of them. These are the ones that we need in the highest amounts. All the rest of them that aren't on this list, cobalt, copper, manganese, molybdenum, selenium, zinc, those are much smaller amounts. But at the top of the list are the salts, sodium, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, and then sulfur for protein, and iron, which is needed for hemoglobin, iodine, which is needed as part of thyroid hormone. This is one we have to worry about in the Midwest because food grown here is in the Midwest. The further you are from the sea, the less iodine is in the soil. So that's why we have iodized salt. But if you're not consuming iodized salt, you might want to think about iodine, adding iodine to your diet somehow. With seafood, if you're eating food from the actual ocean, that has a lot of iodine in it. Dietary deficiencies come in two forms. One would be failure to get enough calories, and the other would be calories are adequate, but one of the essential nutrients is deficient. So both of those would be dietary deficiencies, and of course they impact children who are still growing much more severely and more quickly than they impact adults. Deficiencies in essential nutrients are very well known because they tend to cause noticeable and severe disease. Many herbivores directly consume minerals from clay. They will eat clay. They will lick salt deposits to try to get enough of the essential minerals. For human children, the most likely time in their life when they will develop any kind of a dietary deficiency is when they're weaned from breastfeeding onto solid food. If they're weaned onto food that is nutrient poor, like some kind of a grain without anything else with it to replace all those animal nutrients that were in the milk, that can be a problem and cause protein deficiency and vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Undernourishment is what we call it if there's just not enough calories. And an animal that is undernourished for a prolonged period of time, first the body uses up its own stored fat and carbohydrates. And we do store carbohydrate as glycogen. Glycogen is stored in your liver and in your muscles. That will be used up first, actually. So if you're fasting for a medical procedure, let's say for a day or 2 days, all of the stored glycogen in your liver is going to be used to help keep your blood sugar elevated. Your body will start using your stored fat. Even a person who's not overweight has many tens of thousands of calories of stored body fat. It's just one of the things that we do so that we can go without food for a few days safely and fairly easily. Once the stored carbohydrates are used up, unless the person is very overweight, there's not going to be enough fat for all the daily calories. So the body will quickly start to break down its own proteins. And we know this from human studies. There were individuals during World War II, conscientious objectors during World War II, who volunteered to be part of experiments to see what would happen to soldiers who were, say, trapped behind enemy lines and had no food for weeks at a time. And so they starved these volunteers and monitored their body composition. And none of them were overweight to start with. They were normal weight. And what they found was that within a few days of starvation, the body starts to break down its own muscles, proteins, even heart muscle started to be catabolized for energy. And these individuals did not have excess body fat to burn. So eventually it's going to affect the brain. And it's somewhat recoverable. I mean, we do know from prisoners of war and other people who've had prolonged starvation that it is possible for adults to fully recover if it's not too long. Children who undergo prolonged undernourishment, however, often have permanent deficiencies that cannot be recovered, even if the feeding is recovered. How do we figure out what our exact nutritional needs are? Very often, the most common way nowadays is to do an epidemiological study where you survey people. Researchers send out food surveys to thousands of people and ask them about what kind of a diet do they eat, and then they might bring them in one time and weigh them and take their blood pressure and everything, and then they compare. Of course, they use a computer to do this. They compare all of the parameters that they know about the people. They ask them about their health history, when do they have arthritis and all this stuff. And then they compare that to their self-reported diet. And this is most of the nutritional studies that you hear about in the news are mostly done this way, with just sending out surveys and then crunching the data and trying to figure out what goes with what kind of self-reported diet information goes with what kind of outcome. The problem is that this kind of study is not an experiment. An experiment would mean we're taking two groups of people and we're saying, okay, this group of people, we're going to give you this diet, and this group of people, we're going to give you a different diet, and then we're going to come back in 6 months or a year from now, and we're going to measure your blood pressure and your weight and things. That would be an experiment. These are, by and large, not experiments. They're epidemiological studies, and they can give us a lot of interesting information, but we have to be very careful about drawing a cause and effect relationship from these. And here's an example of a study. This is my favorite example of bad epidemiology. So this was a study that was published in the 1980s. And they sent out surveys to people, and they were specifically interested in coffee drinking. So they asked people whether they drank decaf or regular and how many cups a day. And then they asked them about their cancer history and other health things. And they found, in fact, a really strong correlation between drinking regular caffeinated coffee and lung cancer. And in fact, there was a dosage effect in their study. So the more cups of coffee a person drank, the more likely that they had had a previous lung cancer diagnosis. And so the news, was announced that drinking coffee causes lung cancer, and it's the caffeine, because decaf coffee they didn't find any correlation with decaf coffee. But perhaps you can think of a different explanation, because this wasn't an experiment. And it turned out that what they in fact found was that smokers drink regular coffee. They did not take smokers out of the data set. And so when they did that, immediately after this published study came out, people said, you happen to have any smokers in this study? So they took the smokers out and the correlation disappeared. So we have to be very careful about correlating things. So in fact, there is a very strong link between drinking caffeinated coffee and lung cancer, but it is not cause and effect. The link is that smokers drink regular coffee. That's the link. That's what they really found. And if you've ever lived with a smoker, you would probably know that. Smokers tend to drink a lot of coffee and they don't drink decaf. So another study, which is still ongoing, it's called the Framingham Study, and it's been going on for like 80 years now. And it's another survey study where they bring people in. It's a town in Massachusetts where pretty much everybody in the whole town agreed to be in this study. And all they do is they bring people in once a year, take their blood pressure, weigh them, survey them about their health problems. And they also give them food surveys and ask them what they're eating and drinking. And then they crunch the data. And there's thousands of people in this study. It started out initially with a little over 5,000 people. I don't know how many people are still in it, but of course people have died and been replaced by other people in the study. But in the 90s, they published two interesting results that they found from the Framingham study. And one was that people who said they drink 8 glasses of water a day live longer. And people who said they took a multivitamin every day live longer. And so the headline was, the vitamin companies were thrilled. And they said, look, this study shows that taking a multivitamin or drinking 8 glasses of water a day makes you live longer. Well, again, that's not an experiment. They're just asking people what they do. So about 10 years later, somebody did the same thing, but with an experiment where they took people and they divided them randomly into groups. And this was 2 separate experiments. And one, they gave people water. And they said, okay, here's your 8 glasses of water a day. You got to drink all this water every single day. And the other group, the control group, they said, just, drink whatever you want. And then they had another study with multivitamins where they had a placebo for this one. So they said, this group, you're going to take this multivitamin, this group. They gave them a placebo. So they didn't know if they were taking an actual multivitamin or a placebo. And both of these studies found no effect. They found zero health benefits for drinking 8 glasses of water a day, and they found 0 health benefit for taking a multivitamin every day. And that kind of surprised people, but the explanation for these results is something that we call healthy user bias. So people who are health conscious do a lot of different things than the general population. They exercise more. They go to the doctor for checkups. They know what their blood pressure is. If their doctor prescribes them a medicine, they take it. They try to keep their weight down. They don't eat candy constantly. Somebody says this, eating a lot of sugar is bad, then they don't eat as much sugar. These are the health conscious people. Well, if you're just doing an epidemiological study like the Framingham study, where they're just surveying people, you have this mixed population in this town. Some of them are the healthy users. So if you're trying to find a correlation between like eating broccoli and health, who eats the most broccoli in Framingham, Massachusetts? The healthy users, the health conscious people. There's probably other people who are like, I hate broccoli, I'm not eating any vegetables. Those people probably don't follow other kinds of health advice. They probably don't exercise. They probably aren't concerned about their weight. They're not drinking water. They're not taking a vitamin. If their doctor gives them a blood pressure pill, they don't take it. So we have to be, this is one of the reasons we have to be very, very careful with taking health advice from an epidemiological study that was just a survey where people pick their own groups. It's also been found that health conscious and healthy people are far more likely to enroll in these studies. So there are people in Framingham who aren't in the study. The people who agree, if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, we're doing this research study and we're going to do this multi-year study and we want you to participate in this study and we're going to survey you about your food and you got to come in once a year and get weighed and have your blood pressure taken. Who's more likely to sign up for that? Healthy people and health conscious people. So that's an additional bias in the system. They're missing a whole bunch of people in studies like that. So if there's a study that's published that you hear about where they say, oh, there's a study showing that eating carrots, it makes you live longer, go look it up and see, was it just one of these epidemiological studies where they sent out food surveys, or did they actually do an experiment and put people into groups and have a control group? So the three main categories of research for human health, epidemiological studies is what I've just been telling you about. These are super cheap to do. You just send out surveys and you can survey thousands of people. You can do it, a study in 1 year. So this is the majority of the nutrition information that we have now are coming from these kind of studies. So be very careful. We absolutely cannot determine cause and effect from these kind of studies. They can give us a hypothesis. If we find that people who eat fish are less likely to get Alzheimer's, that's a great hypothesis. Let's test it with an actual experiment where we'll put people into groups and then give one group fish and tell the other group don't eat fish. And then we'll come back in 10 years and compare them. So be careful with those epidemiological studies. The next best would be laboratory studies that use animals or cultured cells. So now we're doing an experiment. We have an experimental group and a control group. But again, we have to be careful about generalizing. We can prove cause and effect, but if we've done an experiment with mice, how generalizable is that to giving advice about human nutrition? We have to be careful with things like that. It might be able to be generalized, but we shouldn't immediately generalize it to human nutrition advice from a single rat experiment, for example. The best thing, what we want to do is a clinical trial with humans. We want it to be a long trial if it's about nutrition. We want to follow people for years. We want to put people into a group. Don't let people pick their own groups. We're going to have an experimental group and a control group, sometimes multiple experimental groups and a control group, and then compare their health outcomes. This is really the best way to determine cause and effect, and these are the most expensive studies to do, which is why there aren't as many of them. Okay, so that's the end of the first video. This is there's going to be 3 videos for this chapter.